Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Rae of the EAFC video game and the Bundesliga. You're listening to the SFF Podcast World Cup Special, the home of World Cup 26 banter.
187 days to go until Scotland play their first game of the 2026 World Cup against Haiti on 13th of June, or technically 2 a.m. 14th of June UK time. 6 days later, they come up against old foes Morocco before finishing off with Brazil in Miami, where we hope to finally beat them for the first time at the fifth attempt in finals history. Can always dream. The first two games, of course, will be played at Gillette Stadium in Boston, and I'm delighted to be joined by a Scottish commentator who resides in the city, where everyone knows his name. Cheers for coming on, Derek Rae. First of all, describe your excitement at Scotland being back on the world stage.
Hi, John. Yes, great that Scotland are back on the world stage. I have to say, I commentated on my first World Cup in 1990 in Italy, and it was hard for me to think back then that it would take until 2026 to have a chance of commentating on Scotland at a World Cup again. They were there in 98, of course. But for me personally, as you mentioned, it's a bit of a story here of my worlds colliding. And you and I spoke ahead of the Euros. You know, I think people who know me possibly know that I work in Germany the majority of the time on the Bundesliga. But my residence, technically, is actually here in Boston. So I have this sort of dual existence, or, you know, maybe it's a triple existence being a Scot as well. And I did have a bit of a premonition. I was in the city just the other week, and I took a picture and put it out on social media. And I said, wouldn't it be incredible if Scotland descended upon Boston the way that Scottish fans descended upon Cologne and Munich a couple of years ago? And so it is, and not just one game, but two in a row. So Boston is going to be very Scottish during that middle week in June.
Yeah, I think the gods have been very kind to you in that way, as you say. Cologne a year and a half ago, and it was, although that Scotland played in three different cities, that seemed to be the one that most of the Tartan Army talk about the most. And now Boston's going to have that similar feel.
Definitely. Boston is going to be the headquarters for Scotland. And, you know, you look at all the games that are going to be in the Boston venue, and Scotland are front and centre. And the word has got out, you know, watching local TV over the weekend. And even the people who cover the news, who are not football experts at all, they're excited about Scotland because I think they understand that there are some countries who bring a bit of passion and colour, some countries who don't. We are in the former category.
Yeah. How much preparation do you think that the Boston pubs are going to be for the arrival of Scotland? I mean, we've got 6 months to prepare, to be fair. But Cheers is obviously, we've mentioned that before, that will certainly be a hotspot, you'd imagine.
It will be. It's a bit of a tourist trap, I have to say. It's not where I would go to have a beer in Boston, but I suppose if I were a tourist, then I might do that, would want to do that, would want to have a picture. Certainly, if you're of a certain age and you remember watching Cheers, you're going to want to have that picture. But Boston does have its own pub culture. And as people will know, if you were to go back in time, say 40 or 50 years, there'd have been more of an Irish feel to Boston than there is now. So you still have the Irish pubs. But the great thing is that it's very multicultural, and you have influences from different immigrant groups. You know, that's the truth of the matter in Boston. And I used to live, when I first moved to Boston in the early 90s, I was the press officer for the World Cup. Maybe that's the other thing people don't know. I was the press officer for the World Cup organizing committee in Boston in 1994. So that was my first job when I actually came here, having worked for the BBC for a few years. And our headquarters were right in downtown Boston, right at Government Centre. And so I rented a very small flat, tiny flat in the North End, which is the Italian section of town. And that was just brilliant because it was at a time when you didn't have a lot of satellite TV coverage of football. I was fed a steady diet of Serie A all the time around the clock, these Italian coffee shops and restaurants and, you know, old-time Italians, clearly born in Italy, who had moved over to the States. And everything, you know, all the discourse was in Italian. So you still have that. You have the North End, which has some of the greatest Italian restaurants you'll ever come upon. And as I say, there's a bit of everything in Boston that way. And of course, there's a big seafood culture as well. You'll discover what clam chowder is if you don't already know. You'll get into lobster rolls. It's, fresh seafood is a big thing in Boston. There are so many elements to it.
So basically, beer, seafood, and football. It's quite a
Yep.
combination.
It's not bad, is it? It's not bad. And yeah, Boston has its own little, brewing culture as well. But you'll find beers from around the world. And I'm sure the Tartan Army will not need a lot of time to work out where the best places are for them.
Yeah, in terms of the stadium from the centre, I haven't looked at Boston to see where this
Yeah.
stadium is or anything. So for those who aren't aware, is it a long walk or is it a couple of trains or how's the logistics to get into the stadium?
This is the one problem, I would say. I'd call it a problem. It's just a fact of life. The stadium in Foxborough is about 23 miles from the city centre. And it's not an easy 23 miles on a match day. So this is why I always say to people, and so many have asked me in the last few days, I always say, on match day, it's going to be a hike, irrespective of where you are. So you need to build in that time. We spoke about this with Germany, that if you were coming from a different city, don't think you could just look at the timetable, jump on a train and walk off the train and go to the stadium and it'll all be fine. You need to make sure that you are there really early because the traffic can be a massive problem. And you have a bit of a sort of a cultural distinction here because whereas most Scotland fans, I assume, who are in the Boston area will not have a car. They'll be relying on some form of public transport, shuttle buses, whatever, lift from somebody. Most Americans who go to Foxborough, Gillette Stadium, as it's officially known, they would go by car. It's a very car-orientated society. So people jump in their cars and they think nothing of, maybe having to sit 2 hours, depending upon where you live, to get to Foxborough. And then it can be a bit of a mess getting out of there as well. So get there early and have a plan for getting there early. Now, there will be a helping hand, I'm sure, from the organisers because there is a special train that can be put on for these big events, leaving from Boston South Station, going to Foxborough. It's a bit of a windy route, but they're trying to upgrade the station to make it, a bit more doable and usable. And I assume also, again, from 94, we had shuttle buses that people could take from a central location. So I imagine that will be on hand as well. And I imagine the Tartan Army will be active in having their own shuttle buses. I'm sure that will be the case. But it's just a bit different. It's not, Foxborough is not in Boston. Let's just get that straight. It's not in Boston. So the venue is Boston, for obvious reasons. It's the Boston venue. People will be in Boston and the surrounding area in the days leading up to the game. And you really only go to Foxborough on the match day itself. There's no need to go there particularly for any other reason. There's not an awful lot there to do. So it's a place to go to for the game. It would be like having a stadium, a Scotland stadium, a national stadium somewhere sort of halfway along the M8, and sort of plonked right there off the M8 and massive car parks which stretch for miles. So if you have a car, usually you can take your car and then you walk the last little bit. But that will take some coordination. And that's why I think it's really important, if you're coming for a few days, to choose your town wisely. And that doesn't necessarily mean picking a town that's right near the stadium. I actually wouldn't do that. I would be thinking about where we're going to have the most fun. Where do we want to be on the non-match days, knowing that on match days themselves, you are going to have a lot of travel.
Yeah, it certainly sounds it. But the sounds of things, it sounds like the Foxborough Stadium is almost like what the Alliance is like. Because I remember being at the Alliance for the opening game of the Euros, and there was nothing around. It's a great stadium, but there was nothing around it for anyone to go to because industrial state. I'm not saying this is an industrial state, but not a lot there. You say in terms of pubs, but maybe they might put in a fan zone or something. Hopefully.
I don't know. That there has been some talk about that. It just depends how they coordinate it. I know in 94, we very much made Boston the center of everything, so that all the attractions were in Boston. The fan zones are sort of a newer concept. And I would imagine that somewhere like Copley Square in Boston, or maybe a part of Boston Common, or even City Hall Plaza, these are sort of areas where you could find fan zone type facilities and make them available to fans. the stadium itself, as I said, you're right. I mean, Allianz Arena, a little bit similar, but it's closer to the city centre. And of course, you have that, you have the U-Bahn stop right there, and you walk about 10 minutes, and the stadium is right in front of you. You don't really have the same thing at Foxborough. Yes, you do have this train station, but it's not a very well used train station. So you do have to sort of work out how you're going to do it. Now, I think the other thing that Scotland fans are going to get used to, if they're not already used to it, is, as people say here, Ubering, using the Uber. And I would strongly recommend that people download that and have it available, because there are times when it is the quickest way. If there's 4 or 5 of you, to pile into an Uber, that can often be actually even more cost effective in terms of getting around. And the other issue you have is this 9 o'clock kickoff for the first game, 2 a.m., as you said, in Scotland, John, at 9 p.m. In Massachusetts. So by the time that's over, it's going to be after 11. By the time people pour out of the stadium, it's going to be midnight. And then it takes a while to get back to wherever you're going to go. So if there are special trains, it'll be well into the early hours of the morning by the time you're back in the Boston area. So then people who have maybe booked accommodation in some of the surrounding areas, which I think is a good plan, which we can maybe get to, then you're looking at, well, how do we get there, if we don't have a car? So that's where Uber can be your friend. I took an Uber the other week from the center of Boston to where I live, which is about, 25 miles, and came in at about, $65 or something like that. So again, you have to have that plan in your head. You can get in from these places if you're on the train during the day, but at 2 a.m, there are no trains. You have to wait until 6 o'clock the next morning. So that's something that you do have to have in your head as part of the plan.
Yeah. Do you not think they've maybe put some on, knowing that the occasion that we've got all these thousands of football fans?
I would hope so.
Soccer?
But yeah, I would hope so, but I don't know. While it's really important for us, that may not be the overriding thing for somebody who's planning a train route. They might think, we've never done that for anything else. We don't do it for concert. If Taylor Swift were playing in Boston, we wouldn't do that. So why are we doing it? I don't know. It's a good point, and it's one that maybe I'll raise with people who I know in the political world here, because it's something that would be certainly very useful. But I think for just one game, the attitude might well be, no, well, let them take Ubers. I don't know.
Yeah. What in terms of the Gillette Stadium itself, or what used to be known as the Foxborough Stadium, what's the atmosphere like in that stadium for a sporting event compared to other stadiums that you've been to in the past?
Well, it's obviously known for the NFL, for the New England Patriots. It's the home of the New England Patriots. It's owned by the Kraft family, who are the Patriots owners. And it's a far cry from what it used to be. In '94, when, as I said, I was the press officer, back then it was a little bit barren. It was not an expensively put together stadium. It was actually done quite cheaply. But then a few years later, it became Gillette Stadium, and the brand new stadium with a new feel then. And yeah, I think it's one of the better ones in America. The viewing positions are good. You're quite open to the elements in certain places, so keep that in mind as well. But you're not miles away from the action or anything like that. So it's a good-looking stadium, but it just is not right in the city centre.
Yeah, that's something that the guys will hopefully do their research when they go over. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it just due to financial and family issues, but I'd have loved to have went, but it's just going to be too much. But but in terms of those who are lucky enough to go, what kind of welcome can they expect from the locals? I know you mentioned that there's a lot of Irish communities and lots of other multiculturals, but in terms of the locals themselves, how much of a welcome should they receive?
I think there'll be curiosity when they see, hundreds of kilted warriors arriving in their city, and so that will definitely be different. I don't know if it'll be quite the same as the welcome that Scots got in Germany, because in Germany, as you know, you and I spoke about it, this went on for weeks and months afterwards. It still actually goes on. When I talk to my friends in Cologne, it's like, when are the Scots coming back? We loved it so much. That was one of the best weeks of our sporting lives, just having Scotland there. And of course, the march to the stadium was unforgettable. It will be different because everything's a bit more spread out. It's not, Boston is a small city, and it has all these sort of, suburban areas around it, and they can extend quite far. But it's not the sort of place where everything happens necessarily in Boston. It might happen in other communities across the river or even up the coast. So that will be different. The other thing to keep in mind is, and this is something that I'm sure the Tartan Army will be across between now and the tournament, the laws are different. So you have this open container law in Massachusetts. You're not allowed to, as a matter of course, just be in a public square with a beer glass or a beer bottle and drink beer. That is not permitted. Now, you can have exceptions to that when it comes to special events in certain areas. So it's going to need some coordination, that kind of thing. The fan zones, I'm sure, will have their exceptions. But you can't just pile into a, Copley Square and say, right, we're taking over the square and we're going to, drink the place dry or whatever. So that will need some discussion with the authorities, which I'm sure will already be taking place because they want it to be an enjoyable time for the fans, not just of Scotland, but of other countries as well.
Yeah, and in terms of where you think the best places would be for a hangout, I mean, I know at this stage it's still 6 months away. We don't know what the city's going to look like, but where would you recommend the Tartan Army try and base themselves in terms of no congregation?
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of Boston itself, again, it will come down to what is designated. So I think that they may not necessarily have a say in that, or there'll be discussions, but I think that will be designated. I'm sure there will be a fan zone for Scotland, maybe a fan zone for Haiti for that first game, and so on. Maybe not, but there will be designated areas. So it's not going to be, we'll just take over this particular square and that's it. So I think that will be preordained. I do think though that it will be happening also in other places around Massachusetts. That's what's going to be a bit different, I think. And I say that because accommodation is going to be difficult in some parts of Boston. It can be expensive too. So people are looking, I know already are looking at other options. And what I would say is that, if you'll let me, what I would say is that you should work out what it is that you want to get out of the trip. Now, if you're coming for just one game, or maybe you're there for the first game, you're going to go off to New York in the interim and come back for the second, then you're probably looking at having somewhere near Boston, if not in Boston itself, because you're going to want to rely on the public transport to get in and out, and you probably don't have time to see the many sites, and there are some terrific sites, which we'll get to in a second. Yeah. So that would be plan A for that. The other option for a shortish trip or for just taking in the two games might be somewhere like Providence, Rhode Island. Now, Providence, Rhode Island is to the southeast of the stadium, and it's an old, fairly urban, gritty kind of place. Has a great university, Brown University, has some good restaurants as well. That actually has a train option, a special event train to get to Foxborough. So that would be an option for people who want to fly into Providence Airport, smaller airport. Green, they call it, Green Airport. And potentially a bit cheaper as well. But I would say most people are probably looking at Boston or the suburbs like maybe Brookline or Brighton or even out to Newton if you want to be fairly close to the city. What I would say, though, is that if you are coming with maybe a family or with some friends for a few days and you want to really enjoy the area, I'm a bit biased because this is my area, but I happen to think it's the nicest. Go north. Look north of Boston on the coast. So there's a train line that runs from North Station, takes in places like, goes through Lynn and Salem, Beverly, Gloucester, all the way up to Rockport. These are really nice communities. A bit quiet, they're not necessarily. Salem is the exception because it gets a lot of visitors. So I think Salem has already attracted the attention of the Tartan Army because it's on the coast. You have a ferry into Boston. You get the train into Boston. It's set up for visitors with its museums. The Witch City, great story to tell about the witches of Salem. Maybe not such a great story, but certainly a story that can be relayed in museum form. And that is a place that people would enjoy for a few days. And you have beaches, so you have to think about, if you're going to be in Boston for 7 or 8 days, it's not just about the same old every day. You want to vary it a little bit. And if you want that experience to say, oh, yeah, I went to a great beach or went to Did some great things in Salem and, super restaurants and got the feel of the actual place. Salem's like a little mini Boston. And I know already a lot of people have chosen Salem, but you can take your pick of the other towns up on the North Shore. You have the South Shore as well, which is also nice. It's different. Not quite as accessible on the train. So you have to keep that in mind as well. I would suggest, by the way, anybody thinking of doing this, go to a website, the MBTA Commuter Rail website. Just Google it. And that will tell you where the trains go, which towns, which can help you a little bit. You're still probably looking at taking Ubers, from wherever it is you're staying to some of the stations, because, it might be 3 or 4 miles, because these towns are spread out. They're not just sort of tiny little towns. They're spread out a bit. So you might need that Uber backup as well. But the train will get you in and out of Boston, and then there'll be public transport to get you to Foxborough.
That all sounds good. I'm just picturing when you're talking about Salem, the Tartan Army swapping their Jimmy Wigs for pointy witchy hat and
kilts. That could be an interesting little convergence there as well. Yeah,
yeah. That would be some look. That would be some look with a witch's hat and a kilt. Yeah, that would be.
it might go very well. Yeah, well, I think there were sadly some Scots back in the witch days who were involved with the burning of witches. So there you go.
There's a tune the fattest sketch I'm thinking of, but you might not be aware of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So apart from obviously the football, booze, witches, what other kind of sporting events do you know are happening nearby? Because I know in Germany, obviously all the football season ended, that type of thing, but is the baseball season, I know NFL's not on, but baseball, will that be happening at that time and stuff?
Well, it is, and I think that people have already seen the Red Sox are they're the big sports team in town. You've got the Patriots, the Red Sox, the Bruins, who are the hockey team, and the Celtics. They're all very well supported. But the Red Sox hold a special place in the hearts of locals. And by luck, although it's very hard to get a ticket, they're actually at home during the entire period of Scotland's stay. The entire period. So as you may know, or some people may know, baseball's played pretty much every day in the summer. So there's a game every day or night. So you can go on and have a look. But again, I've not been there for years and years. I used to go in my early days in Boston when I was a press officer quite a lot because it was quite cheap and quite easy. You could get a bleacher seat for about, $5 back in those days. Those days have gone. It's a lot more expensive. But if you're really into that quintessential New England experience, watching a Red Sox game at Fenway Park, then go for it. See if you can do it.
Yeah, well, there might be one or two that try, but they say baseball's popular, so getting a ticket there's at gold dishes like it will be for the World Cup games. But I think that's what they'll be saving their money for, to be honest. In terms of the World Cup draw itself, I mean, I know the draw took about, couple hours, but eventually we found out who we got, and, lo and behold, 28 years of waiting, we get 2 of the same teams. And Haiti. So what was your thoughts when those teams came out?
Well, I think like every Scot, I was a bit worried when the first two, when Scotland joined the first two, because I don't think anybody really wanted Brazil and Morocco from a sporting point of view. I think because we respect both countries and we know that they're very good. And I covered Morocco all the way to the semi-final at the last World Cup. I was commentating for American TV, as I will be again. And they were a joy to watch. They were a breath of fresh air, and they're one of the best teams at this tournament, I think. They're not in the top bracket, but they're in that sort of second bracket, I think, team that could go far again. And so dangerous opponents. So when that happened, I thought, uh-oh. And, of course, everybody wanted to avoid a difficult team in pot 4. Now, what I would say about Haiti is the only thing that gives me a little bit of fear is, having covered 1990, it has a little bit, what would I say? It has Costa Rica vibes for me,
PTSD.
Slightly. Yeah. And I remember before that World Cup, again, being a little bit nervous about Costa Rica because they had no track record in the World Cup. I went to see them train and met Bora Milutinovic, their coach. And, I thought, okay, who knows? Sort of, in those days, you didn't have the same analytical capabilities that we do now in terms of watching them. all I would say is that it's a huge story that they've even made the World Cup. They were not favored to come out of CONCACAF at all. But in fact, Costa Rica are the team that came a cropper in order that Haiti could make it, because they've sort of gone the wrong way. They've been a team we've grown accustomed to at the World Cup, but things are not going so well for them at national team level at the moment. So they've taken that slot. There are more places for CONCACAF teams. But, I mean, with the best will in the world, it is a winnable game for Scotland. And that's the one thing I was worried about. I thought we might go into this World Cup in a group where Scotland are not favourites in any of the games. That could have happened. And it hasn't happened. So it's a great incentive to get off to a flying start, because I think, and I was talking to some colleagues at the weekend, I actually think that 3 points, as long as your goal difference is not completely unhealthy, 3 points may well get you through with this format, with 8 out of 12 going through. I think you'd be a bit unlucky if you didn't, because I think there'll be some groups where you have teams on 1 point and you'll have some teams who'll be absolutely thrashed. So hopefully Scotland are not thrashed by Morocco or Brazil. Hopefully they beat Haiti. Hopefully they take a point from Morocco or Brazil. But I actually don't think it's the worst group in the world, mainly because the timing works. I think having Haiti first is good, actually. I think the chance to get points on the board. And then you play Morocco and maybe they don't have a point. So maybe there's a bit of pressure on them in that second game. Mm-hmm. And then Brazil, although again, it does have 1990 vibes, because again, I was in Turin on that night when we were so close to getting a point from the Brazil game and going through for the first time to the knockout stages at a major tournament. And then poor old Jim Leighton didn't have his best moment near the end of that one. And as I said on BBC Radio as the commentator, the roof has just fallen in on Scotland. That was the line. For some reason, I didn't have it in my head, but it came out at the time. And that's what it felt like. It felt like the roof of that stadium in Turin had fallen in on all of us. And, well, let's hope that that's not the case in Miami in June of next year.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a game that's Matilda two goalkeepers, because Leighton makes that mistake and then Taffarel makes that unbelievable save from Mo Johnson. No, it's... Yep. I still think that's more a great save than a bad miss from Mo Johnson, to be perfectly honest. But that's just a lot that goes against the Scots, isn't it? But I think it's important, the way the fixtures land, as you say, Haiti first, that is the key to absolutely everything for me. And Brazil last might not be a bad thing, because they're likely to be through with 6 points, and a lot of teams tend to rest players for the final game, especially with a 30-man squad, of course, but you never know.
You never know, and sometimes it can be a negative, because you have players who have not played in the first 2 games who have a point to prove, and it's not going through the motions. But I think as a rule, I would rather play Brazil third than Brazil first or second. That's just my feeling, and I would rather play the winnable game first. Yeah, because we remember... I mean, 1990 was just weird, because we lost to Costa Rica, and then Sweden, who we thought would be a really tough nut to crack. We went out and beat them, and deservedly so, and then got ourselves back into it. But, 98, having Brazil first was always going to be hard, in the opening game. And Norway, good team, but similar to ourselves. But I think most people would agree we probably underestimated Morocco in 1998. I don't think people realised they were quite as good as they ended up being, and Scotland didn't put in their best performance. But I think it's there's a fighting chance there. I'm actually more optimistic in a strange way about this one getting out of the group than I was at the Euros. I wasn't really all that I thought, things could come together, but I didn't see us taking anything from Germany for the first game. Switzerland, I thought, would be difficult. And Hungary, I thought, would be difficult for Scotland because of how they set up, and they were. I have a better feeling about this one.
Yeah, but I think part of the key is making sure our best players are fit and playing games, because obviously you lose your right backs for the last tournament, and there will be teams who lose players ahead of this one. There's no doubt about that, but from a Scotland point of view, how much does that give them a better fighting chance if likes of Hickey and McGinn and Gannon Dolk, who's just had an operation himself, that they are fit?
Yeah, it's really important. I think the other thing, in addition to having your best players, the other thing we're going to find out between now and next summer is how big the squads will be. So this is a bit of a sea change. I covered the Club World Cup in the States last summer, and of course we had really bloated squads because FIFA decided that they were going to let squads be large. And I'm hearing that it could well be a 28 or 30-man squad. Now, if it's a 28 or 30-man squad, that's where, this is just my opinion, but that's where there is no excuse to not have every base covered, if you like. And so you mentioned Gannon Doak there. The first thing I thought of when I watched the Scotland-Denmark game, and I've sort of been on this hobby horse for a while because I work in the Bundesliga, first thing I thought of when I saw Gannon Doak go down was Oliver Burke should be on the bench. Now, I know most Scotland fans remember Oliver Burke as somebody who maybe wasn't all that effective 3 or 4 years ago, but there's a guy who's playing in the Bundesliga every week in a top 5 league and is actually the fastest player in the Bundesliga based on the stats this season, and scored a hat-trick in Frankfurt, a very hostile environment. Now, he's had some bad games as well. I'm not pretending that Oliver Burke is the panacea, is somebody who's going to solve all the problems, but in a 28 or 30-man squad, you have to have that option. You have to have that plan B for, the surprise element. He's actually the perfect super sub, perfect guy to come on if, struggling near the end of the game. And you don't want Oliver Burke running at you. Maybe not the most talented football player in the world, but he's greatly improved the last couple of years. So that's where I hope, not just Oliver Burke, but I hope that a lot of thought goes into filling out the squad and not just saying, and I've heard this from some fans, we should just fill it out with young players for the experience. No, maybe in some cases, but make sure everything's covered, and don't just be loyal to the same people who got Scotland there, because things change in a year. And the best, Julian Nagelsmann, who I have great respect for, the coach of Germany, he always talks about the performance principle. He said, we pick the squads based on form. You don't get into the squad because of what you did last year or even what you did in the final qualifying game that might have been heroic. If you're not playing well, you're not there, So, and I realize we're not as spoiled for choice as Germany, but I do think that there are a couple of players like that. Burke is one for sure. There's another guy, Fraser Hornby, who's actually having a lights-out season in the German second division with Darmstadt, who I think may well get promoted at the end of this campaign. And he has, for me, been the best outfield player in the entire German second division. Again, if you get into this discussion with Scotland fans, they might remember him from Aberdeen and say, well, he's not very good, What are you talking about? He's not very good. I remember watching him. He was terrible. Saying, well, watch him now, And this is the whole point that I'm making, is form is really important. I've covered loads of World Cups. I have seen players selected who are not on form, and usually you don't suddenly get on form during a tournament. And this was Scotland's mistake, if you remember, John, back in 1978. Ali McLeod, who we loved at the time, and, he got Scotland there. Fair play to him. But he made a big mistake by prioritising players who had got him there. Bruce Rioch, Don Masson, they were way off form in 1978. Derek Johnston, for example, was really on form for Rangers, but didn't get near it. Joe Harper, who he, as an Aberdonian, I loved, and I'm sure you too. Joey even got on, in Argentina. Probably shouldn't have done, but Ali knew him because he was an Aberdeen player. So there was an example in that World Cup of players, Souness even in 78 should have been playing in those first 2 games and didn't play until the third. So it's a bigger point that I think, we all respect Stevie Clarke and what he's done. He's a little bit conservative with a small c. He's a little bit sort of, I'm sticking with the boys who have done it, and that's admirable. But you have a chance to fill out the squad with other options. Take that chance, and take players who are on form, and not just players who are in Scotland, and certainly not players who are just, who are playing in the English Championship. There's a bigger world out there, and I've mentioned 2 who I'm not saying that should be automatic selections, and they certainly shouldn't be starting on the basis of who's available right now, but they arguably should and could be in the squad.
Yeah, I'm sure Steve Clarke will have a lot of food for thought over these next few months. And we'll got a couple of minutes left in the Zoom call. So just very quickly, Denton, thank you for your time. Just sum up how much you're looking forward to this World Cup as a broadcaster and as a Scotland fan.
Well, as a Scotland fan, 1998 was the last time. As I say, for me, as a broadcaster for Scottish Network, 1990 was the last time. And it feels very special to me because, the Euros were an amazing experience for me as somebody who works in Germany. And now you have the World Cup in my other home area, if you like. So, it is going to be memorable. It's going to be different. I think every fan, every journalist, every player, they're all going to feel the difference, the vast distances between venues, the different infrastructure, things like that. But it will have its own dynamic. And as somebody who lives here, whose residence is here, I do hope people enjoy Boston, and I have every confidence that they will come out of it saying, thank goodness we were in Boston and not somewhere else, because that really was special for us. I think that will happen.
Well, I'm sure that'll be the case. And Tartan Army, if you're listening to this, you've heard the recommendations. Listen to this man's advice, because he knows what he's talking about his city. So thank you again, Derek, for giving us a flavour of what to expect in Boston, and hope you enjoy the World Cup when it comes around. The three other UK nations were included in the draw, though Wales, Northern Ireland are both in the same playoff path with Bosnia and Italy, respectively. We get the thoughts of Russell Todd from Podcast Builds Road and Northern Irish journalist Mark Mackintosh and their chance of progression.
Hello to all my Scottish friends. Russell from Three Lions Podcast here.
An English point of view.
So it finally happened, the World Cup draw. I have to say congratulations on finally getting there. That Denmark game, no denying, it was a great one. Some cracking goals. Lawrence Shankland, pick of the bunch. No, seriously, well done. Oh, as a draw though, God, that was hard work, wasn't it? One day, someone at FIFA will have a brainwave and just say, hey, how about we put some balls in a bowl, pull them out, and we'll be done within 10 minutes. It's not going to happen anytime soon though, is it? But from an England perspective, it's a group we can qualify from. It's not the hardest, but it's not the easiest. Like us, every nation won their qualifying group. Croatia, despite what people say, still keep plugging away. Look at Modric, still doing the business in Italy these days, despite being 40-odd. They've still got Perisic. They've got youngsters coming through. Obviously, I'd much prefer to see a repeat of Euro 2004 than of the 2018 semi-final. Panama, a team who we beat in 2018, 6-1. I'd expect us to beat them again. Maybe by not so much this time. And then Ghana, who I think could be the surprise. A team, again, we've only faced once, and that was in a friendly. And whilst I think there's no reason why we couldn't beat them all and finish top, I can see the likes of Croatia and Ghana holding us to a draw. And maybe we finish second, and then this whole set pathway nonsense goes out of the window. We'll have to wait and see. But as for you guys, well, I'm not sure you could have got it harder. Everyone knows about Brazil, and I'm old enough to remember 1998. You gave them a good go then, but, it's Brazil. Beat them, and we won't hear the end of it, will we? Morocco, I have to say, I think they could go far, just as they did in Qatar. They won the Under-20 World Cup recently. I just think there's something in the water in Morocco there at the moment. And then Haiti. I mean, you've got to be looking at that as the game you have to win. I think it's fortunate that it's fallen as your first game. Get the 3 points there, build with confidence. And I have to say, hope for one of the best third places, if I'm honest. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not convinced by this expanded World Cup, 48 teams. I think it's just going to prolong it for a little bit too long, but it is what it is. No doubt we'll speak before then. So all the best. Enjoy it.
John Bleasdale, my friend, how are you? Russell Todd here from Podcast Peldroid, the oldest, longest running podcast about the Wales national team. Llongyfarchiadau, congratulations, first of all, to getting to the World Cup. I think the Tartan Army, no doubt, will be in good voice and will be a feast for the eyes for all of the other fans over there. Hopefully you can get out of the groups of a tournament for the first time. That would be nice for you, I'm sure. Sorry to say that. Not sorry. You've asked if I would like to share some views on the possible group for Wales, should we get there. And of course, part of me would probably or should probably not be tempting fate or getting ahead of ourselves too much. We've got 180 minutes at least ahead of us in the playoffs. We are at least battle hardened, I suppose, to those, having faced them or gone through them twice recently. Main thing, of course, is getting 2 home legs, which was also the case in the previous 2 playoffs as well. So somebody in the gods of draws is looking down on us in that regard, at least. I think Bosnia will look at us as difficult, given how we put North Macedonia away. And it's probably ironic we score 7 against a decent side. North Macedonia, no mugs. Belgium couldn't beat them twice in qualifying. But at night we score 7, you go and score these outrageous goals to see yourselves home as well. So thanks for that, stealing our thunder a little bit. But I think most Welsh fans, certainly I would imagine most Bosnian fans as well, are the same. We probably are expecting, should either of us get through, to be playing Italy in the second round. No disrespect to Northern Ireland, though they are a stubborn, obstinate group with a little bit of quality. I think it's a big ask for them to win in Italy. If that happens, then we can start thinking about the group, which I guess is probably the blandest, beigest, most prosaic of the groups. There's not a huge amount of exoticism in there, but we'll take it. The biggest bonus, I suppose, is not having England. We've had those twice in the last 3 tournaments that we've qualified for, so not having them, I think, is a blessing, and all the circus, the media circus that comes with that. Canada, we faced only a couple of months ago, actually, down in Swansea. They beat us 1-0. Very physical team. We did a podcast with a lovely Canadian chap based in Montreal in Quebec, who talks a lot about Canadian football and football in that province. And Elias was saying how they're playing very much Canada with a chip on their shoulder, because, of course, they feel they let themselves down in the last World Cup in terms of results, if not necessarily in performances. They were very assertive, played on the front foot. They were quite attacking. I thought they were a breath of fresh air in that regard. Morocco, again, were another team that did that, which was great. Against I think that game would be in Toronto. We've played Canada there once before, back in 1986. We lost 2-0. We were sort of warm up fodder for them going into their first World Cup in Mexico, and I think that'll be a tough game against the home crowd, obviously. And they've had a number of years to build up and really work on their play, their pattern, their spirit, their combinations, all that kind of thing. So that'll be tough. Switzerland, does anybody ever remember how Switzerland do in a tournament? They just sort of turn up and do their thing. We had them at Euro 2020. We drew. They probably should have deserved to win that game, but we managed to salvage a draw, which again is tournament football. So yeah, no worries there. Should we get there, as I say. And then Qatar, probably about the only team that stank out the last World Cup more than we did, frankly. So they'll probably be looking to make a better fist of it. Really hard to know a team like that, because they've got so many naturalized Brazilians and all the rest of it. We have played them once before in a friendly in the late 90s, so there's no opposition like you guys have got with Haiti, where you're playing, and I'm assuming you're playing them for the first time. I'm not aware that you've played them before. None of those really kind of exotic fixtures potentially thrown up for us, which is a little bit of a disappointment, I suppose. But maybe that'll come in the second round, should we get there, or the quarterfinals, should we get there. I think from our perspective, you playing Brazil, obviously throw back to 1998, 82. I think was it David Neary poked the bear. I think that'll be a good fixture. Haiti, sounds a lot like Costa Rica and a lot like Iran and a lot like Peru. So you want to watch yourselves there. I think you've probably got a decent chance of getting through in that group, actually. So like I said, all the best to you. Thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts on some of this, and who knows, we might be facing you next year as by way of preparation, as a little friendly. Who knows? But yeah, diolch yn fawr, John, and all the best.
If I was Italian, I would have been bouncing around the room at that draw. Canada, Switzerland, and Qatar. It's probably the perfect group for any nation to be in. Everyone fears the group of death. I think that one's the total opposite. And for Northern Ireland, it's a massive carrot dangling there to get to the World Cup finals. We haven't been there for 40 years. It was Mexico in 1986, the last time we were there. and what motivation is needed. But if there is any needed, that's the extra bit. I think Michael O'Neill would have been purring, listening to the draw and watching the draw. But look, there's so much to do. We have to go to Italy. We play them in Bergamo on March 26 in the playoff semi-final, and the winners of that will play either Wales or Bosnia-Herzegovina. I would fancy Northern Ireland certainly in the final against either of those two nations, as strong as they both are. But the big test, obviously, is going to Italy. That's going to be an extremely difficult game, given the fact that Northern Ireland's away record isn't great. I would fancy them to give anyone a game at Windsor Park, but look, that's going to be the huge test. But they know what the job is, and if they can get that done, like I said, the carrot's dangling there. It's an unbelievable draw. The first game would be against Canada, one of the host nations. I think that's a game that everyone would enjoy. The atmosphere will be crackling in Toronto. I think that would be unbelievable. And then Switzerland are in the group, and they're old foes of Northern Ireland. They beat Northern Ireland in the playoff for the 2018 World Cup. A very controversial tie. The first leg was decided by a penalty. It was an extremely dodgy penalty, a handball given against Corey Evans. And to be honest, I'm still not over that one, never mind Corey Evans. And we ended up drawing the second leg in Basel, and it was an absolute nightmare because Northern Ireland certainly deserved a lot more. But look, like I said, it's an unbelievable draw. Qatar are there as well, of course. And that would be a tough game, but you would expect Northern Ireland to win that. So all in all, I think difficulty going to Italy, but that's where it starts. That has to be the focus. But after that, if they can get the job done and qualify for the World Cup for the first time since 1986, what a group it is to look forward to.
Well, thank you to the two Russells and to Mark for their thoughts and draw from their perspective. And thank you again to Derek for a great insight into Boston that should give the Tartan Army plenty to think about. We'll have more World Cup specials between now and the big kickoff, so please keep tuning into SFF Podcast and follow us on all our socials for further updates as and when they happen. Thank you for listening, and happy football.